Believers who read Psalm 63, our Psalm of the Week, will envy David's beautiful relationship with God. They'll envy it in a good way. The way that he describes it is so incredibly inviting that we'll say to ourselves, we want that kind of a walk with the Lord. Listen to how he describes it. He earnestly sought God. His soul thirsted for the Lord, verse 1. For him, God's steadfast love, as he says in verse 3, was better than life. His soul clung to God, verse 8. He rejoiced in God, verse 11. David was so close to God that he could talk with God as a man talks with his best friend. How is this kind of religion possible? And how can we experience it ourselves? Well, Psalm 63 suggests a couple of answers. By describing some of the key disciplines that David practiced that doubtless allowed him to experience this kind of a relationship with the Lord. And the two main disciplines that come to the surface in Psalm 63 are meditation and worship. First of all, David meditated. We are simply not a meditative generation, are we? Frenetic busyness is a virtue. We invite our brains to be rewired by overusing social media. I mean, if we're honest, we skim far more than we reflect. Distraction monopolizes even our downtime, and that downtime is some of the best time for meditation, as Psalm 63 suggests. David remembered God, he says, on his bed, verse 6, and meditated on him in the watches of the night. David is describing what we would call downtime, those moments between the time that we lay down and that we fall asleep, or those moments when jobs or other obligations technically allow for multitasking, like a watch of the night. You know, when a person is tasked to stay up and just make sure nothing bad is happening. Yeah, we'd probably use that time to flick through our various feeds rather than meditating. Or the moment that we're lying down before we go to sleep. If we're putting entertainment in front of our eyes, we're wasting a key moment that David used to meditate and to thereby grow closer with the Lord. David deliberately used these times to meditate. He remembered God. He fought forgetfulness by reflecting on who God is and how he had helped him, he says in verse 7. David, in fact, as he writes in Psalm 119, verse 148, could anticipate the night watches to meditate on God's word. So David meditated, allowing him to have a very intimate relationship with God. Second, David worshiped, the psalm teaches. David didn't simply go to church, lest we equate worshiping with being in a particular location. Now, he did that. He did go to church. In his language, he says in verse 2, I looked upon God in the sanctuary, beholding his power and glory. So however different going to church was for David than compared with our day, David did that. But he did more than that. He didn't just show up. He worshiped. He gave himself to the worship of the God he loved. He used his body to powerfully express his love for the Lord. Remember one time in the Old Testament history, his wife criticizes him. David, you've embarrassed yourself. You've danced before the Lord, and you didn't show the kind of dignity that a king ought to show. And he rebukes his wife and says, I will do this and more. I'll give myself entirely to the worship of God. I'm not afraid of what people think about me. I'm not concerned about how I'm viewed. I'm going to give myself in worship. He used his body to powerfully express his love for the Lord. He says in verses 3 and 5, my lips will praise you. I will speak the praise of God and people will hear that. I will sing for joy, he says in verse 7. The king shall rejoice in God, verse 11, all who swear by him shall exult. So there is clearly a tight relationship between glorifying God and being satisfied by him. David uses those two concepts in verse 5. As we come to glorify God, we find ourselves more satisfied in him. And as we find ourselves satisfied in him, we glorify him, we worship him. Before we close, I wonder if you noticed that, you may notice as we read Psalm 63 in a moment, that David's enemies are nearly an afterthought. They're mentioned only briefly in verse 9 and verse 10. And that's unusual, isn't it, from the Psalms that we've been reflecting on over the last many weeks, where David's enemies, his problems, the opposition he faces are front and center. Here they're off to the side, only mentioned twice. Well, that's what happens when we seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness, as Jesus puts it in Matthew 5, verse 33. Our troubles don't vanish when we meditate on God, when we worship God, but they can become eclipsed by a vibrant, intimate, close walk with the Lord, experienced through meditation and worship. Let's listen to Psalm 63 now. A psalm of David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory. Because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips when I remember you upon my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you, your right hand upholds me. But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, for the mouths of liars will be stopped.